homeless man asks Johnny Depp for $1. The response left everyone speechless. It was a moment that could have gone unnoticed. Fleeting interaction on a bustling street where life seemed to move far too fast for anyone to truly see what was in front of them. A man, weary and lost to the rhythms of the world, sat at the edge of a crowded intersection. His head lowered as though the weight of life itself had become unbearable. His clothes hung loosely over his thin frame, worn and frayed, while his trembling hands clutched a cardboard sign that simply read, "Anything helps." His name was Michael, a man who once had a life that looked like anyone else's. But today, he was invisible to the countless pedestrians who walked past him, their eyes fixed on their phones or lost in their own hurried thoughts. The noise of Los Angeles roared around him, the honking of impatient cars, the shouts of vendors, and the rhythmic beats of street performers who played for tips. The iconic streets of Hollywood Boulevard buzzed with tourists, snapping pictures, excited laughter, and the occasional starry-eyed awe from fans who recognized a celebrity strolling by. But not everyone on that street had a camera aimed at their favorite landmarks. Michael sat still in the chaos, unseen and unheard, hoping for a few coins to make it through another day. It was then that Johnny Depp appeared, walking down the street dressed in a way that allowed him to blend into the crowd. A black beanie hid most of his face, sunglasses shielding his famous eyes, and a worn leather jacket that looked more like something from a thrift store than from the closet of a Hollywood star. He wasn't there for cameras or fans. He was simply a man out for a walk, seeking a rare moment of solitude amidst the endless chaos of the city. No one seemed to recognize him. No one paid him any mind. And that was exactly what he wanted. Michael, lost in his own despair, barely noticed Johnny's approach until the moment their paths aligned. "Sir," Michael began, his voice hesitant, fragile against the hum of the city. "Can you spare $1?" It wasn't much, and the words themselves carried a quiet kind of shame. But desperation had forced him to ask. Most people would keep walking. Some would pretend not to hear him at all. Johnny stopped. He didn't just stop moving. He paused in a way that felt deliberate, like time itself had slowed down. For a brief moment, the noise of the street seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them. One man asking for help, the other deciding what to do next. Johnny turned to look at Michael. Really look at him. His gaze steady and unflinching. It wasn't the look of pity or discomfort that Michael was used to. It was different, softer, deeper. "Why just $1?" Johnny's voice was low but clear, cutting through the noise. The question surprised Michael. It wasn't what he expected, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. His eyes darted down to the pavement. "I just need something to eat," he mumbled, almost embarrassed by his own honesty. Johnny didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He held it out to Michael, who looked at it as though he had been handed a lifeline that he wasn't sure he deserved. "This is too much," Michael stammered, his voice shaking as he looked from the bill to Johnny. "I can't take this." Johnny's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "Sometimes it's not about what you ask for," he said softly, "but about what you need." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. And in that moment, Michael felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. It wasn't just the money. though it was far more than he had hoped for. It was the way Johnny looked at him, as though he were a person with a story that mattered. But Johnny wasn't done. Without hesitation, he sat down on the curb next to Michael, his movements unhurried, his presence grounding. For a man who had lived much of his life in the glare of cameras and red carpets, the Hollywood icon looked perfectly at ease sitting on a dirty curb in the middle of Los Angeles. Passers-by slowed, casting curious glances, but Johnny ignored them all. "Tell me your story," he said. It wasn't a demand, but an invitation, his voice soft and open. Michael hesitated. No one had asked him that in a long time. People threw spare change at him, sometimes with a glance of judgment, but no one ever wanted to know who he was. Slowly, cautiously, he began to speak. At first, his voice was quiet and unsure, but as he went on, the words came more freely. He told Johnny about his life before the streets, a time when he had a stable job in construction, a wife he adored, and a son who called him a hero. Then came the accident, a fall at work that left him injured and unable to do his job. The medical bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and when the money ran out, so did everything else. His wife took their son and left, unable to endure the stress of their circumstances. Eviction came next, followed by nights in shelters and eventually the streets. As Michael spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of the memories. His eyes glistened with tears. He tried to blink away, but Johnny said nothing. He just listened, his face etched with quiet empathy. When Michael finished, he looked down at his trembling hands. "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted. "I don't even know where to start." Johnny reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He held it out to Michael, who took it hesitantly. "This is the number of a friend," Johnny explained. "She runs an outreach program that helps people get back on their feet. Housing, jobs, whatever you need. Tell her I sent you." Michael stared at the paper, his fingers shaking as they clutched it tightly. "Why are you doing this?" Michael's voice was barely above a whisper, heavy with disbelief. People didn't do things like this. Not for him. Johnny stood brushing the dust off his jeans before extending a hand to Michael. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Come on," he added with a grin. "Let's get you that meal." The two walked down the street together, side by side. One man, who the world called a star, the other, who the world refused to see. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. When they reached a small diner tucked away from the main street, Johnny held the door open for Michael and gestured him inside. The waitress looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized Johnny. But he shook his head subtly, a silent request for discretion. Over plates of food that Michael hadn't tasted in years, the two men talked, not as a celebrity and a stranger, but as two people sharing a moment of humanity. Johnny listened more than he spoke, and when he did talk, it was to share snippets of his own struggles, moments of loss, moments when life had knocked him down. "We all fall," Johnny said quietly. "The trick is getting back up." When the meal was done, Michael hesitated, unsure how to thank the man who had given him more kindness in a single afternoon than he had seen in years. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. Johnny smiled again, that same small, bittersweet smile that hinted at things left unsaid. "Just promise me one thing," he replied. "When you're back on your feet, help someone else. Pass it on. They parted ways outside the diner, Johnny disappearing back into the chaos of the city as quietly as he had appeared. Michael stood there for a long moment, the crisp bill and the folded paper still in his hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The story might have ended there. Another quiet act of kindness, lost to the noise of the world. But it didn't. Weeks later, word spread that Michael had reached out to the outreach program, just as Johnny had suggested. They helped him find temporary housing, connected him to resources, and eventually helped him secure a job. When asked about the moment that changed everything, Michael simply said, "He saw me. That's all I ever wanted, to be seen." Johnny Depp never spoke publicly about the encounter. That's not who he is. The man who has played eccentric pirates, misunderstood outcasts, and larger-than-life characters is, at his core, someone who believes in quiet kindness. These stories of his generosity, whether it's helping a stranger on the street, visiting sick children in hospitals, or supporting crew members in need, speak to a deeper truth about him. He doesn't do it for recognition or applause. He does it because he understands the value of being seen, the importance of second chances, and the power of human connection.